All right, in our first screencast on chapter 10, we're going to get a little introduction to the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process that converts solar energy into chemical energy. And this is basically the source of all energy here on Earth. It comes in as solar energy, and then anything that performs photosynthesis, any organism that performs synthesis can convert that light energy into chemical energy. So directly or indirectly, photosynthesis nourishes the entire living world, pretty much. So, as I said before, think a plant. All right, organisms that can make their own food energy via photosynthesis are called autotrophs. So they don't eat, they harness chemical energy from this, harness light energy from the sun and change it into chemical energy. We call autotrophs the producers of the biosphere. They produce organic molecules from carbon dioxide gas and other inorganic molecules. Okay, almost all plants are photoautotrophs. Photo means they use light for photosynthesis, using the energy of sunlight to make organic molecules. Photosynthesis occurs in a number of organisms, not just plants, also algae, protists, and some prokaryotes. And again, these are our autotrophs, and they feed not only themselves, but the entire living world because we eat them for the energy they contain. So here's our plants, and we know they perform photosynthesis. But algae, protists are photosynthetic. Bacteria are photosynthetic, both cyanobacteria and purple sulfur bacteria. So there are many, many, many different kinds of organisms that perform photosynthesis in addition to just plants. On the other side of the spectrum, heterotrophs obtain organic material or food energy from eating other organisms, and therefore are the consumers of the biosphere. Okay, so all heterotrophs, including us little lowly humans, depend on photoautotrophs not just for food energy, but also for oxygen. And oxygen is one of the byproducts of photosynthesis. We hear a lot about fossil fuels, and basically fossil fuels are the remains of organisms that have died hundreds of millions of years ago and gotten compressed and turned into coal and oil and all that kind of stuff. And again, whatever energy was stored in those animals, those organisms, be it plants or animals, when they die, is stored then compressed into these fossil fuels. So fossil fuels represent stores of solar energy from the distant past. All right, so let's get into photosynthesis. So photosynthesis converts light energy into chemical energy. Okay, and this occurs in organelles called chloroplasts, which we know about. And they are structurally similar to and very likely evolved from photosynthetic bacteria. And again, remember, this is our endosymbiont hypothesis. Endosymbiont hypothesis. And so make sure you review the structural organization of chloroplasts, and because you're going to have to be familiar with it in order to understand the location of the chemical reactions of photosynthesis. So where do we find our chloroplasts? Basically, leaves, and this is why leaves are green. Leaves are the major locations of photosynthesis. If you think about it, they spread out, they face the light. It's very easy for the sunlight to hit them. Okay, the green color of leaves is from chlorophyll, which is a green pigment within the chloroplasts. And chlorophyll is going to play a major role, and we'll see what role it's going to play in our next screencast. Chloroplasts are mainly found in mesophyll cells, which is the interior tissue of the leaves. And each mesophyll cell contains about 30 to 40 chloroplasts. So if you think about all the hundreds of thousands of cells in one leaf, each one contains 30 to 40 chloroplasts. That's a lot of photosynthesis. So here's my leaves. Here's a cross section of a leaf, and you can see here's a mesophyll cell, and the mesophyll cell is down here, and you can see it's basically chock-a-block full of chloroplasts. All those little green circles are chloroplasts. Another thing very important for sustaining photosynthesis is gas exchange. Okay, carbon dioxide is an ingredient. It needs to get into the chloroplast, and here's a zoomed in photo or cartoon of a chloroplast. So we need carbon dioxide to get into the chloroplast, and we need the oxygen to be released from the chloroplast. And they're released through these little kind of mouths or pores in the surfaces of the leaf called stomata. Okay, so carbon dioxide enters and oxygen exits the leaf through microscopic pores called stomata. The chlorophyll is found in the membranes of the thylakoids. And so we're going to look at that picture of the chloroplast again, but you have to know kind of exactly where all this stuff is so that the reactions of photosynthesis will make sense. Chloroplast also contains stroma, which is a dense interior fluid. So here's my chloroplast. And again, each one of these little folded membranes is called a thylakoid. Okay, the thylakoid is hollow inside. Okay, so there's a space, a compartment inside of the thylakoid, and you can see that here, where the thylakoids are split apart. Okay, and then we have stroma, which is the fluid that is contained within the chloroplast, within the inner membrane of the chloroplast. And here's what like a live chloroplast looks like. Okay, so some chloroplast anatomy. And the thylakoid membrane is where all of our chlorophyll is, and you can see that's why they're all green from the chlorophyll. All right, so just like we did with cellular respiration, we need to keep track of all of our players for photosynthesis. So again, same thing, keep track of the carbon, keep track of the electrons, keep track of the energy. Photosynthesis is an extremely complex series of reactions. Again, more complex than cellular respiration, but if you keep in mind what happened during cellular respiration, the reactions of photosynthesis should make more sense. Okay, and here's the summary reaction. So carbon dioxide and water are our ingredients. Okay, why is that? Oh, that is extra 6 over here. That's why I'm confused. Plus some light energy, yielding glucose and oxygen as our products. And if you remember, this is the reverse of respiration. Okay, and you remember kind of like the last part of cellular respiration, oxygen was our terminal electron acceptor. It accepted the energy electrons that were depleted of their energy from the electron transport chain, along with some protons and hydrogens, protons are hydrogens, to form water. So of course, the first step of photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast, where water is split into hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, and then the electrons that are released eventually get energized and stored into the carbohydrates, such as glucose. Okay, so again, it's just the reverse process of what happens during respiration. Here's looks a little bit, just tracking some of these molecules. The carbon in carbon dioxide gets incorporated into glucose. Okay, the oxygen in the water is released as oxygen into the air. So that's kind of like the two important things to keep an eye on. All right, so photosynthesis again is the reverse of respiration. It reverses the direction of the electron flow. So rather than electrons being released at high energy from glucose and accepted in oxygen to make water, they are taken from water, then they get energized and get incorporated into carbon compounds such as glucose. Okay, it's again a redox process as we're tracking our electrons. Water is oxidized and carbon dioxide is reduced. So it's reduced, so that's where the electrons end up, is with the carbon in glucose. And photosynthetic is an extremely endergonic process. Lots of energy you need to put in, and that energy is provided by light. And this is just showing again here, carbon dioxide becomes reduced into glucose. So this is where my high energy electrons are. And then the electrons are removed from water, and water is oxidized and released as oxygen. Okay, 2 stages of photosynthesis. The first stage is called the light reactions. That's the photo part. And the second stage is called the Calvin cycle, and that's the synthesis part where glucose is actually built. So the first stage, the light reaction, which occur in the thylakoid membrane, which is where chlorophyll is. So a lot of this happens in the vicinity of chlorophyll. Water is split. The splitting of water releases molecular oxygen and releases electrons that are then energized and accepted by NAD+, which is an electron carrier, into NADPH. Okay, so then that's where my electrons are. And also ATP is generated from ADP by a process called photophosphorylation. Okay, and this is all occurring in the membrane of the thylakoid in the light reactions. So here's my light reactions in the thylakoid. Water goes in and is split. The electrons reduce NADP+ and are used to make NADPH. Some also energy from high energy electrons is used to photophosphorylate ADP to make some ATP. Okay, and here's our source of energy, which is light. Okay, when water is split, it's released as a molecular oxygen. And then the second step, Calvin cycle, uses the products of the light reactions, the ATP and the NADPH, to form sugars from carbon dioxide. Okay, and the Calvin cycle begins with carbon fixation, which is turning carbon from an unusable form into a usable form. Okay, and let's see. So here we have our products of the light reactions, and they are necessary to drive the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, or the fluid surrounding the thylakoids, and they take the energy in ATP and NADPH, use it to fix carbon dioxide into sugars. Okay, over the course of the Calvin cycle, once the energy is transferred from ATP and NADPH, it regenerates NADP+ and ADP, which can get fed right back into the light reaction. So you see it's this wonderful cycle that feeds itself. Okay, that's it for our introduction to photosynthesis, and the next screencast is going to get right into the light reactions.